Hey, folks, thanks for checking out ManTalk. I'm Todd Hayen, and I'm a practicing psychotherapist in the Toronto, Canada area. And then everywhere else in the world, I'm an archetypal counselor. So I'm here with my colleague and co-host, William Impey, who will tell you a little about himself in a second. Today, we're going to discuss Jordan Peterson's comment on the devouring mother, a comment he made on an interview with Joe Rogan on his insanely popular show, The Rogan Experience. But before getting into this week's clip, I'll turn this over to my co-host.
Hey there, everyone. William Impey from Toronto as well. I'm an existential counselor, shamanic practitioner, dark worker.
That's cool. Anything else? Okay, here's a... Before we get into our discussion, I'll play this little clip from one of our favorites, as everybody knows, old Dr. Peterson here. And then we'll get into talking about it. Here it goes.
Look, man, Freud was no dummy when he pointed to the fact that the devouring mother was one of the major impediments to proper human development. He knew that, looking deep into the darkest families and seeing this proclivity of the overprotective mother to destroy the developing integrity of the child, to keep the child infantile, to cling to that relationship instead of developing a life for herself and letting the child go flourish. That's Hansel and Gretel, right? You're lost in the woods. Why? Well, your family's broken up. And you have an evil stepmother. So now you're lost in the woods. What's your abuse rate if you have a step-parent? 100 times normal. So you're lost in the woods. Well, what happens? Well, you come across a gingerbread house. Well, that's pretty damn convenient. You need a house. It's more than you could even hope for. It's not just a house. It's a house made out of candy. Well, what's inside a house made out of candy? A witch who wants to fatten you up and eat you. And that's the devouring mother, and that's an old fairy tale.
That's great. Yeah. So what do you think?
Whew, chills. I mean, Jordan's so good at walking you through these things and bringing them into perspective. Yeah, I mean, the thing that strikes me about this is the level of kind of evil that he sees in this, the darkness, the depth of the darkness that's in this myth and in this this phenomenon of the enmeshing mother. I think he says in other places too that it's like the most pernicious form of abuse ever in all of human history, or something like that. And I think he's onto something there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a comment on the feminine in general, but the shadow feminine, the dark side. The devouring mother is one of the biggest topics in my work with young men in particular, and older men as well, because most men that are having trouble, at least in relationships, you can trace it back to issues around mother. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be a evil witch fattening them up to devour them, but there is an awful lot around the mother archetype as it relates particularly to a young man, or particularly to a man. Not as much to a daughter, although you have that as well. And in the story, it's interesting, in the original Hansel and Gretel story, she originally starts out wanting to fatten up the boy and have the girl help her fatten him up. I mean, that's the original intention. And then later on, she decides she's going to eat them both, which of course also happens. I mean, it's not just the boy that gets devoured by the shadow mother. And it's interesting too, in the original story, like Jordan mentions, both kids come from a broken family, in the sense that the mother is a stepmother, whatever that means, whether the real mother died or left or what. And she's plotting to kill the two children because they don't have enough food for the four of them. And the father doesn't want to do this. He's against this idea. So he goes against the stepmother, but he doesn't stand up to it. He doesn't stop it. He actually goes along with it, which is also an interesting comment of the devoured male, the father who is already devoured by the feminine, the shadow feminine, probably through his mother. Of course, we don't know anything about his mother. But ironically as well, when the children return after killing the witch, which really the daughter is the one that kills it. Gretel is the one that kills the witch. they return home to a happy father and the stepmother is dead, which I thought was quite convenient. They got rid of both of them by getting rid of one of them, which again is the symbology of it. You know, the shadow feminine that was very obvious in the witch is killed, and then that also gets rid of the shadow stepmother, which is interesting.
Yeah, and the depth of the wounding too, being that they're not protected by the father, that the father is in collusion, but also that he's not protecting them. And so there's the way that trauma compounds. You know, it's not what happens to you, it's that you're left alone in it, that you're not defended by it.
Right.
And particularly wounding for the son, because he's looking to the father to model for him mature masculinity, which is essentially what's under attack from the enmeshing mother, to cut off his development, to cut off his capacity to develop masculinity in its fullness, in its mature form, and to stand in his power in that way.
Yeah, no, that's really good. The story itself, which is interesting, doesn't go much into, if any, doesn't go into at all the boy's relationship with the father. And it doesn't really touch on even the relationship with the stepmother, although she symbolically is obviously not just symbolically, but she's literally trying to get rid of them. Okay, so they do have that relationship with her in that sense. There's the whole bit with dropping the breadcrumbs and dropping the pebbles in order to find their way home, because their first attempt, the parents' first attempt to get rid of them, he drops pebbles, and there's all kinds of symbology around it. I can't remember what it is, but the pebbles light up in the moonlight, and the kids actually get home the first time. And then they try it again. They try to get rid of them again. And that's when it works, you know, that the kids get lost because he drops breadcrumbs and the breadcrumbs get eaten by the critters out in the forest and all of that. So there's a lot of depth in this story that isn't just about devouring mother. The relationship between the two siblings is important as well. That Hansel's really playing the role of the prince, which is relatively developed considering what a bad relationship he might have had with his father, although you don't really know that, of course, because he's good at figuring things out and coming up with a plan, where Gretel doesn't really do that. She more acts out intuitively, and which is also interesting for the feminine to be acting intuitively. She shoves the witch in the oven at the last minute. She tricks her and gets her into the oven, but Hansel doesn't really have anything to do with getting rid of the witch. He's just clever, showing her a chicken bone to make her not think he's fattened up enough to eat. But he's good at that as well.
So the children wind up outsmarting the parents.
Yeah, they do. They definitely do, because they go along with it. Up until the parent, or I think the father's the only one that takes him out. They go along with it until he leaves, the father, and then the father, I think, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but I think the father then follows his pebbles, and then the two kids do later, and that's how they get home the first time. And I'm not quite sure what he's doing the second time. If maybe the father, maybe they drop the breadcrumbs and the father, the animals hadn't eaten them yet, and the father gets home and the kids wait till night. But they go along with him leaving them out in the woods until the last minute, and then they try to fend for themselves. They think they're going to find their way home, obviously, the first thing. And then when they can't, they wander around in the woods. And I think they encounter a bird or something that's supposed to be hope or whatnot, and then they run into the candy house and start eating it, of course. And that's when the witch comes out and says, "Why are you eating my house?" And they go into that. The fairy tale itself is interesting, but I think the bigger picture here is the devouring mother, just in a general way. So where else do we see that in our own lives? Where do we see the devour? And Jordan touches on that, this idea of the mother not making a life of her own and essentially extending her worth and her value into her children, and then wanting to control that by controlling the adult children, or when they get older or whatever. So
yeah, well, the martyrdom of the mother, the mother martyr complex,
Right.
It's a kind of sunk cost fallacy. I've given so much, I might as well give it all.
Yeah.
But essentially what she's unconsciously trying to accomplish is to block the initiation process. And yet in the myth that you just described, initiation happens regardless. You can't stop it. And that's something that's interesting that I see, you know, in men, is that, you know, even if they don't successfully go through an initiatory process between their boyhood and their adult or their biological manhood, they still seek ways to find it, and it'll still happen. You know, it'll still happen. It kind of comes through despite it all. It can be a lot more effective and go a lot deeper, of course, if it's conscious. But these micro initiations will always sort of break through to the surface, and we see that a lot in men, I think, these days.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But and I'm sure you would say this too, I don't think it always happens. I think there are times where it becomes overwhelming. And that boy ends up a drug addict, or ends up, you know, relationship after relationship that fails. Any number of things can happen. Certainly the powers that are within that son, that boy, are powerful enough to push through quite a bit of problematic situations. It's like it has to be pretty extreme for it not to succeed. But there's generally some kind of shrapnel left in the process. If you have that mother wound that's really, really large through adolescence, and you have the whole Oedipal thing that goes along, if you have that, very often you're going to run into at least I see this in my clients, you run into trouble with trying to establish a relationship with the feminine that's healthy, that actually is not somehow linked to mother and linked to being treated as boy by the partner, the projection of the mother onto the wife or onto the partner, and then the projection of boy back from mother from the partner onto the male partner. So,
well, like, I think, you're right. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but I think that what's interesting is that there's this feeling that it's always trying to have, like, there's always these opportunities for initiations. And one of the things that causes suffering in a man's life, I think, is that he goes through all these failed initiations, trying over and over again to complete this process that he can't quite manage, mostly because he's not doing it consciously. He's pulled into it.
Well, that's the key, in my view, to all of the problems we have along these lines, archetypal issues, is consciousness. And I think back at a time, you know, maybe the early part of the century, and certainly before that, where people were more well versed in literature and art and plays and whatever. I think they had a better chance of being a little bit more conscious of these inner workings, these inner systems, the archetypal systems. And now that I don't think that really exists, other than in visual media, it might to some degree. A lot of television series and whatever are very archetypally based and have a lot of archetypal messages to them. But people don't read the same way they used to. They don't read literature. They read stuff that, for the most part, doesn't really cover these things. And so you do have a better chance of that initiation process failing over and over and over again, which is a product of the culture and the time. And it's too bad, because the conscious part of it is really the part that gets, in my view, that gets people through it, is to become more and more conscious of what's going on internally. So.
Yeah, and I think that those failed initiations compound the wounding from the father who can't protect them.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately what the men are looking for is elder men to help them complete the initiation. And the original wounding is that there wasn't one in the first place. And then the compounding of the wounding is that they go looking for ritual elders to help guide them through and can't find them. Right.
Yeah, I always tell my clients that are dealing with mother issues that the father is an incredibly important part of that process of avoiding the depth of the mother wound. The father has to come in and do what you just said with the son, but he also has to do that with his partner, with the mother. That he has to take her in more as a romantic interest in his life, in order for her to stop projecting that onto her son, if that's what he's doing. I mean, almost every time I have a big problem with a mother wounding and a client, the father wasn't even there. He was they were either divorced, or he was dead, or he's an alcoholic, or he's just completely out of the picture in some way. I mean, that's almost always the case. It's not always the case. There's always outliers, but so he's a very, very important part, just like you said, in mitigating that wounding and allowing the initiation, because the initiation is a defiance that has to take place. This separation from the relationship with the feminine in mother has to be removed, because he can't have an erotic relationship with the feminine in mother. And when he reaches the age where he's going to have an erotic relationship with the feminine, that has to get transferred out into somewhere else, or else you got big problems, which is rare, but it still happens.
But my sense, though, is that you don't really have a mother wound without a father wound, or a father wound without a mother wound. They go hand in hand, because what happens is that if, for example, if the son is enmeshed and engulfed by the mother, it's a failure of the father to protect. If you're abandoned by your mother, it's a failure of your father to keep her there, to bring her in, to protect you from the abandonment. So they always, I think, go hand in hand. And you're right.
I agree.
But you'll see it to larger extent and lesser extent. I mean, it's obvious when the father is literally absent, single mother households, sure.
Right.
But a little bit more pernicious and hard to parse out when the father was present, but somehow unable to successfully give the sense that the presence and the protection is there. I always want to come back to, it's not what happened to you as much as it's your perception of it. You could have never actually been abandoned by your father, but if you feel deeply enough that you were, that constitutes the wound.
Right, and that's going to be dependent. I mean, they are children generally when this happens, so they're not very wary or philosophical or intelligent, even when you're kids. So you don't really identify the truth about situations like that. But a lot of times there's something that can be very minor, yet have a huge, profound effect. And those are the ones that I find the most difficult. It's just like what you're saying. You can have a father that, in all senses of the word, objectively, as the client tells you about them, seems like, hey, he was there, he was good, he was this, he was that. But there could be something that nobody's going to remember, or some way he was raised by his father or whatever, that just comes through and doesn't lock up properly.
I mean, the relationship needs to be demystified, because that's the thing. At first, you're always going to feel this presence of like, everything was fine in my life.
Oh yeah.
So once the demystification process sort of starts to really happen in earnest, you can start to see through the cracks what wasn't there. But it's interesting, like they how these kids outsmart the parents.
Oh, and that's the myth, the fairy tale,
right. And so but because they wind up sort of more mature in the end than they were in the beginning. So there is a kind of a success in the initiatory process there. Right. But I wonder too. I mean, there's a couple of things in all of that. The breadcrumbs are interesting, or the trail. You often think about in psychodynamic therapy, we are always following these trails back. Yeah. And another thing too that's interesting with the breadcrumb trails, if you leave them long enough, they'll disappear.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah, they'll disappear just without the animals eating them.
Yeah.
But even the animals eating them is odd in my view. It's odd thinking that those two kids, as smart as they were, didn't know that was going to happen. And I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, I have to go back and really read over it in a lot of detail, because there's some things I'm sure I'm missing, but
maybe. But I mean, but I would say that, okay, so maybe what's conveyed in that is that they start clever, but still a little naive.
Yeah.
That they wouldn't have put that together. But here's another thing that I was wondering. Yeah. So then they, in this outsmarting in order to survive, I mean, I wonder if therein lies the dissociated, schizoid break, where you have to be in your head in order to figure out how to survive your wounding. You have to think it through, right? You have to. It has to be something where you leave the body, you leave the instincts, and try to figure it out. right? So in the one hand, they're successful and outsmarting their parents. On the other hand, they've now got this like sort of this dissociation, this schizoid thing where they're forced, instead of just being as kids need to be in order to develop, that they're now in this place of being broken off from the body and in the mind.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Let's go back a little bit to the devouring mother again. We have a very literal presentation of this with this story, because the mother literally wants to eat them. And what is the symbology behind this idea of actually being a witch in the woods with a candy house? Like, where is that going from a depth perspective? And she's the one that's going to devour them, whereas the stepmother just wanted to get rid of them and wasn't looking to devour them, which is a symbol of taking nourishment in from the child, which is kind of what Peterson's alluding to, the devouring mother being the one that can't grow on her own, that can evolve into something that's self-reliant. Without taking her children and consuming them. The original mother, the stepmother, isn't wanting to do that. She almost doesn't really count as a mother figure in the story. She's a stepmother figure, which is generally seen as evil and narcissistic, and not so much I want my children to supply me with my worth, because the stepmother doesn't care about that. Her worth is getting rid of the children and taking the husband or his riches or whatever 100%. That's her symbology. That's her archetypal meaning. Whereas the witch is the one that actually wants to consume them. So she more represents that in devouring mother. You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, and also just to point out, witch to the extent that she's calling on shamanic powers for shadow purposes, not consciously. So she's a witch, but only to the extent that she's calling on these shamanic powers in the shadow sense, not in the true sense of a woman who has acute awareness.
Oh, right.
Of the world. And so I just want to make that distinction clear, because I think oftentimes we have this sort of conflation between the shadow feminine and witchcraft, or that witchcraft is somehow evil in and of itself, which of course it's not.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion.
Whole other thing.
That's good though. That's great, because go ahead.
Yeah, but so I think what it seems as though she's trying to do is that she feels disempowered in herself, and she's trying to steal the power from the children, and maybe even it's more. It's like she's feeling like a lack of vitality, and she's trying to steal the vitality of the children. More often what I see though is that it's about a wounded parent who's not strong enough to hold what they're carrying, asking the kids to carry it, right? Their children have to carry their load that they can't bear, right? This is a little bit different, but I think it's within the same territory. But in this case, it feels like there's this loss of vitality and this need to steal it from them, and in literal, in the myth of I'm going to use, like, it's your flesh is being turned into my life force.
Yeah, and fatten that up so that there's literally more of it. And she is she's crippled in the story, the witch is, and she's of course hideously ugly and old. So it's the old Skeksis image from the Dark Crystal. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie. But that's essentially sucking the soul essence out of the children. Which would make you young again. And this theme of taking youth and somehow consuming it in order to be young again is a very common theme throughout history and fairy tales and myths. And that's essentially what you're describing from a more literal perspective in the story. Obviously, the story is presented literally. In our normal life, the mother seems to be a failure without being a mother. And once her mothering is over, she no longer has anything to be successful in. She's lost her vitality. So therefore, she has to keep squeezing it out of her children, who are not children anymore, and she's no longer the mother. So you could see that as a reason for it. Where do we go with that idea? That is that a natural thing for mothers to always do? Are they always going to feel as if they're losing something vital by losing their children? I kind of think that's probably true, more true than not, although there are times where it's not. And therefore, what is it that keeps her from doing that, from feeling she needs to get her vitality from her children? Is it the husband? Is it the partner? Like we're saying earlier, where he will instill that, he will give her that vitality at that moment, at least, not necessarily all the time, but at that moment in her life. Is that what it is, or is it something else?
It just shift vitality to soul for a second, because I mean, essentially what she's experiencing is soul loss, and she's trying to reclaim soul in this unconscious way, right? Because she can't find someone to guide her through the process to do it. Where did she lose her soul? Well, I mean, that's trauma.
Okay.
So and what we see as her, depicted as being ill, I mean, that's a physical manifestation of the psychic trauma that she carries, right? Right. And so how does this happen? Well, it's undealt with traumatic wounding in her that's led to a soul fragmentation and a soul loss. And then, one of the ways that she has been dealing with it also is that, so she's in the mother martyr thing, so she's giving even more. And so she's run dry. She's got nothing left. And, like all things with trauma, she's looking for the fastest, simplest, easiest way to get out of the fix. And it's like, well, right there's vitality and soul in front of me. So I reach for what's at hand and try to nourish myself with it desperately, because I've lost this thing and don't know how to find it.
Right. And of course there are many, and just going back to what I said just a second ago about the husband, I don't mean to imply that for women to be fully integrated, a mother to be fully integrated when she's losing her children, that she needs to have a man around. I mean, it's more of what that man can bring to her from an archetypal perspective. And she can get that from a variety of places. In my opinion, because I've had a lot of clients that are single mothers that have raised their kids to a point where they go off into their own life, and she's perfectly fine. And she doesn't have the devouring mother compulsion. So she's found her soul and her vitality or whatever in other ways than finding it. I think in a perfect or near perfect archetypal setting with mother, father, children, and everybody functioning really well from that archetypal perspective, very often it is going to be the partner. If there's love there, if the two of them love one another, and if he's strong enough that he can deal with that, I think a lot of times that's the easiest place to get it from. Nowadays it can come from your work, it can come from which are all essentially masculine archetypes, but it doesn't have to be embodied in a physical partner. Well, I mean, I would say that it's not you don't need a man necessarily, but you need the presence of the masculine, and you need it embodied in someone who's not you. I wouldn't argue with you there. If you're saying it has to be a body, a person, I don't know. I don't know. You could easily persuade me to believe that, but it may not be. I mean, maybe ideally it should be in the body of a person that isn't you, obviously. But I don't know. Does it really need to be in a human body?
You think about how people they look at a single mother who's accomplished, raising kids on her own, and the reaction is always that it's a fucking miracle, because it is. It is. It is. I say, because it's literally impossible to do that. And if you're able to achieve the impossible, that's incredible. Yeah. Right? And that's worthy of admiration and awe. Absolutely. 100%. But I think it's important to think of it as being impossible, rather than thinking of it just, it's difficult, but it's, you're capable of doing it if you really try. Oh, yeah. No, you're right. No, this is going to be impossible. If you can pull this off, you're a miracle. And I'm swinging my pendulum too far the other way. Okay. Because I don't want to sound sexist in any of this. And that's why I said the near perfect archetypal setting
is having the king, the queen, the prince, and the princess, having that within that system, because if you don't have that, then you're up against pretty much impossible odds. But it doesn't mean you can't do it, because obviously women do, and there are amazing women that do that, amazing mothers that can do that and not try to suck their children dry when they're leaving like that, because they have nowhere else to turn.
Right.
And so I think it's actually more
heroines, right?
Absolutely.
The hero, the heroine is that they've actually been able to accomplish something that appears to be impossible.
Right. Right. Yeah. And for all intents and purposes is impossible.
Right.
But the fact that they do it obviously says it isn't. Right. But it's actually more interesting to look at, not to look at those exceptions, but to look at the basic rule of why is it that you've got. Okay, let's just go this route just because it's easy to talk about. Let's go the route that the reason, or because it's probably in the middle of the bell curve. Okay, the reason why mothers devour their children is because there is not a strong partner, masculine archetype, whatever, in their relationship. The father is weak. Why is that? Why does that happen? Yeah. I know that's like, let's talk for 18 hours about that, but it's like, what is going on? You've got probably a husband that was also devoured by his mother, and it's turtles all the way down. It just keeps, going and going, generation after generation.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, I think it's because the family system is essentially broken.
Right.
By which we mean that it's not whole.
Yeah. Right.
And what was needed in that to maintain wholeness is containment, which is what archetypally the masculine brings. Right. Yeah. So, and containment is also a function of protection. Right. So if the masculine is capable of containing the feminine, and so that the wounding can happen within the containment, it doesn't spill over and cause harm, in the family system. I think that's when things become functional. Right. That's when healing and transformation can happen. But if there isn't a sufficient amount of masculine containment, and again, to go back to your point, doesn't necessarily need to come from a male-bodied, male-identified person who's in partnership with her, right?
Right.
But to the extent that that's not present, then there's no containment. Then the disintegration of the system continues to fall apart. It needs to be held together by the masculine. And so the miracle of the single mother is that she's able to hold it together while she can still fall apart into her own trauma and work through it. Right. But this is the thing about the impossibility, is that one of the reasons that it's impossible is that you as an embodied being cannot be in two places at once. You can't be two things at once. I mean, sure, there's a proliferation of the psyche, but this is like how we need to recognize that we need to be whole enough into ourselves, but we also need to recognize that we are in community and in relationship with other. That's what it means to be human. We need each other. But we can't do this alone.
Well, that's another one that we could go on 18 hours with, because it's one of the myths of our current quasi or pseudo self-reliant times is this belief that we don't need that in order to survive well. I think we can survive as a simple term. What does that mean? That just means that your body is still, doing its processes, but the psyche's survival is a higher level of expectation. It's to be creative. It's to be joyous at times. It's to suffer and not succumb to suffering. There's all kinds of things that make the psyche survive. What the minimal of what survival is, and I think that we're in anybody that believes that we can do that alone and by ourselves is not seeing
and it's only the first part of the process. I mean, survival is healing, right? Thriving is transformation. Healing is feminine, transformation is masculine. You need both, right? Because if you're just healed, but you haven't transformed the wounding, then you haven't really begun to thrive. You're only just keeping your head above water.
Yeah. No, I like that. I hadn't heard it that way. And just for clarification, anybody watching this, we use the word feminine and masculine quite a bit, and I certainly am referring to the archetypes when I use those terms.
Of course,
I'm not referring to gendered animals, humans or otherwise. It's and maybe it's unfortunate that those were the terms that were given, but I think most people can understand why a particular archetypal pattern is considered masculine and some are considered feminine. Are there any archetypal systems in your mind, William, that are not masculine or feminine?
No.
Really? Okay.
I don't think it's unfortunate. I think what's unfortunate is that we've conflated the two.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of this is a lot of the problem of the undifferentiated psyche is that we conflate these things. We conflate, for example, masculinity with its shadow, right? The feminine with women, and I think often what people get hung up on is in their mind they think what you're saying is something about so women, female identified, female bodied people need to be feminine and men, male identified, need to be masculine, and therefore it's sort of this fear of traditional things. It's the complete opposite. It's the complete liberation from this thing, because it's recognizing the masculine and feminine within you, whether or not you're male or female bodied. You have both. You have the capacity for both. It's the yin and the yang, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't matter how you identify.
Right? Yeah. Now, okay, on that topic, just for a second, is trickster masculine or feminine?
Yeah, right. Good
Sorry,
question.
that's a reason why I think that.
No,
it's really
stay there for a second. Hold on, because
Yeah, okay. Huh?
There's no answer to that question.
Okay.
Right. Because the trick is the trick in the trickster is that it's feminine and it's masculine. It's neither or, and also,
and it's right. Okay. No, I like that. Is trickster the only one we can identify that way? Because it's the only one that comes to mind.
The only archetypal entity that's what?
Well, the archetype that we identify as the trickster. It's the only one that I can think of that's like that. It's not feminine or masculine. It's both. It's neither. It is, blah blah blah. Just what you just said. Are there any other
that comes out of it? Yeah.
Are there any other known archetypes that we talk about that is identified that way?
Well, I think it's important to remember that there is no such thing as all masculine or all feminine.
No, right.
That's the yin and the yang. So it's you can say, so take the example of the mother archetype. The mother archetype isn't pure feminine energy. Okay. It's a constellation of feminine energy in a way that's nurturing, but still has a drop of the masculine within it. And so you can never really take the two apart.
Okay.
And if you think about if you moving through the alchemical process, the conjunctio at the end is the recognition of what was one in the beginning goes through this process and becomes one again, because it was never actually. It's only an illusion of duality that they exist in the first place, right?
Well, any of these kinds of things, if you start getting like I'm doing right now, not what you were doing, but you get esoteric about it. There really isn't a single word that can describe anything thoroughly. And, we use the terms masculine and feminine for convenience, where, we can't, and I can't in particular, because you don't do this, but I can't think of that as being like mother being purely feminine, because it isn't. But what is it? What is the percentage that's, you start getting into that kind of thing, and it's pointless, because it isn't
dynamic.
Right.
You can't do a percentage.
Right.
I mean, you have to only do a phenomenology of it, because even when you say mother, that's a bound infinity within the boundaries of this thing, because there's an infinite number of ways to inflect mother archetype. Yeah. There's forms of mothering that are very masculine, forms of mothering that are very feminine. All of them within the boundaries are still mothering. Yeah.
Absolutely, but then you could get into a comment like, and this is probably where I would have gone with this before listening to your wisdom. I would have gone for the idea that no archetype can be can be the only constellation at any moment in a human experience. Like you can't be mother for even a second without something else, some other archetype coming in and having a play in the behavior or the thought process or the intention or whatever it might be. So rather than say that mother archetype contains all of those things, you just say that the human being cannot constellate a pure mother archetype 100% of any time. It's always going to be mixed with other elements, just like you're saying, that the behavior of mother nurturing the child, but also yelling at the child at one point because the child does something bad, the discipline or whatever. Those are probably more masculine archetypes than they are the feminine archetypes, or maybe shadow versions of the feminine archetypes, whatever it might be. It's just, this is two different ways to look at the idea of the archetype. I mean, there's no way. I mean, even Jung was confused about what those words actually meant. Throughout his career, he was always changing his definition of archetype. And as it's constellated by a human creature, it's going to be all kinds of things at any moment. It's just predominantly one or another. The warrior out on the field, throwing the spear at an enemy is a dominant warrior archetype at function, but he can also negotiate with an enemy and not pull his sword at all. And he's still being the warrior. He's still being the protector or the offender or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anytime that you're working in archetypal realms, it's necessary for you to let go of any kind of certainty and allow yourself to be confused. It's very much like dream work. I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are intimidated or kind of shy away from the work, is because it does an endless sort of number on your head trying to figure out what the fuck we're talking about when we're saying these things.
Well, listen to us just talking.
You say mother, what do you even mean?
What are you talking about? I know. Well, it's all like that. And I think that's one of the things that as you become more comfortable with this, even, I mean, we're both therapists, but even somebody that's just listening to this that isn't, you have to always keep that in mind. It's like if you go away from one of these talks saying, I don't know, I'm really confused, then you're getting it because the confusion is a big part of this. It's like we have no way to verbalize the intricacies and the detail of what we're talking about. They're broad strokes. Yeah. And, you can get a lot from, I mean, if you read any of the analyses on this fairy tale, they're all different. It's like they have a broad stroke. There's a basic idea that the witch is evil and she's, whatever, but the detail of it. And that's one of the things about reading fairy tales. You go, what the hell does that mean? Really? That means that? And then you read somebody else's interpretation and it's something very different as to what it means. It's like, that's the whole point, is that we don't know. And
I think one of the prerequisites for starting out on the journey of healing and transformation is that you're going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's one of the big problems that we have with psychotherapy as it's being practiced for the most part these days, is that a lot of people are not willing to allow themselves to be uncomfortable, nor is the therapist willing to let them feel discomfort for fear that feel
discomfort himself or herself.
Feel unsafe or something. As if the healing and transformational process was somehow a safe one.
Yeah. Oh my God. No. And also, I mean, that's
by definition, by going out on a journey, you're leaving safety behind to go to accomplish something.
Right. No, people for the most part, they want to be fixed. They want to be healed. They want to be made happy. They want to come up with ways that they can exercises they can do that's going to make them. Yeah, they don't. For the most part, people don't want that.
They're under the spell of the devouring mother, that they are broken and are needing help.
There you go. That's a good tie-in. Yeah.
And the work for me is always breaking the spell of their own brokenness and needing help.
Yeah.
Because if you remain under the spell that you're broken and need help, you're going to constantly be looking for mother everywhere you turn.
Right.
And then there are mothering entities, shall we say, out there that are more than happy to latch on to you.
Really?
and to monetize the process. And this is how we get into the problem of codependence in psychotherapy.
Oh yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
It's a huge
like,
issue.
Huge
It's
problem.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, tell me, and this again could go on forever, but tell me what you think the difference between, because we're mostly talking about, at least I've been mostly talking about devouring mother to the male, to the son. What does the devouring mother look like to the daughter? How is that different than the devouring mother to the son? And how does father play in that? If father isn't there to essentially pull the projection that mother has of erotic dependency on son, to pull that back over to him, that's not going to take place with daughter, because there is no not a specific erotic projection from the mother to daughter. There might be, but that's not really where the issue is. The issue is more about the daughter not being good enough as a woman or whatever it might be. I mean, that's where at least I see a lot of the issues. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, if we start from the place that one of the problems in the first place is the lack of masculine containment. Right?
Okay.
That she needs the masculine in order to help her find the containment so that she can work through reconciling what's hers to carry and what's not. Okay, so then by definition, what that means is that she has, if we look at the sort of traditional family of son and daughter, and then we add the husband, there's 3 children for her to take care of.
Right.
Getting one out, so then she's overwhelmed because she can't take care of 3 children. She can't have the 2 biological children and then be taking care of the wounded inner child within the masculine. Right.
Okay.
So to a certain extent, it almost feels to me like, going after the daughter is getting one more thing out of the way to try because it's always about dealing with overwhelm. These hastily conceived strategies that cause so much harm is like, I'm overwhelmed. I can't take it. I got to find some way to be able to draw a breath in this thing. And because you feels like you're drowning in those moments, that's why you're willing to go to such lengths and to do such perceivably evil, wicked things in order to get it. So if she feels like she's drowning in a family system where there's too much nurturing that needs to be that she needs to give, maybe in this case, like to the father, taking out one of the sources of that's draining her aliveness could be the motivating factor. I mean, it's so much easier for me to think of why the devouring mother focuses on the son. Maybe that's just because I'm.
Oh yeah, well, it is me too. I'm sitting here trying to think of what I'm going to say. I see so often is competition between mother and daughter.
Sure.
And I wasn't okay. The mother wasn't as good as the daughter, let's say, or she perceives that when she was her age. Yeah. Therefore, she projects that onto the daughter, like you're not good enough or whatever it might be. And then, of course, that goes back and forth. But in my view, it's so radically different. The mother-daughter relationship. It can look similar. It can look like the Wicked Witch. Okay, it can look like that. But the actual dynamic of what's going on, I like what you said about the masculine containment, still has a role in that relationship, which I never really thought of. And I think that's really important to think of it that way, because it's still there. I mean, very, very often you don't have a good relationship with the daughter and father in those situations, just like you don't with the son and father or the mother and father. And that goes across the board as well, where that's because the masculine containment isn't there, not just with the partner, but with the daughter as well, because the father has a relationship with the daughter that is male, female, masculine, feminine relationship. So going along this line, why do you think, and maybe this is totally insignificant, but I'm curious if you have a thought about it. Why do you think in the story, Hansel or Gretel doesn't get put in the cage to be fattened up? That the witch says, I'm going to eat him when he gets fat, and you're going to help me get him fat. I'm not going to eat you until the end, where she decides to. Why do you think that's in there? if you think there's any reason for it other than convenience in writing the story, if there's any symbolic reason or archetypal reason.
Well, I like to work on the principle of like, if there was a meaning, what would it be? Not, is there a meaning? Yeah.
Yeah, good.
I mean,
there was a meaning, what would it be?
If there was a meaning, what would it be?
Right.
She's struggling to find access to masculine energies within her. So of course she's going for the masculine energies in him, fresh, young, vital,
Right.
Unpolluted masculine energy in him.
Right. Right.
She's not getting enough of it from the father, so she's going to steal it from the son.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the daughter? Why is the daughter spared that to start with? It's almost like she's kept on the side to be a servant,
Mm-hmm.
to be what is it that what is the goal or the intention of the mother with keeping the daughter close at hand, but not actually to suck anything out of? It's almost like she keeps her there just so she can fight with her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just making this up as I'm sitting here.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know that an answer jumps to my mind as much. I mean, yeah, good question.
I mean, that's maybe we need a female therapist to come
Right.
in and
Exactly.
because really that's where we obviously are blind
Totally.
to the intricacies of the feminine as it functions in those situations. Just like you said, I don't think about that often. I don't think I have a couple of clients whose mothers are big problems for them, but it's like, well, she's your mother.
You're making my point about like, you can't really you can't do it on your own. It's like you
right.
Someone else to carry that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. Jordan Peterson is talking about in this. He starts with Freud wasn't wrong or something. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Well, and then he's talking about the family romance, the competition, within. And it seems like that's kind of what we're landing on here is that that there's this sort of sense of. Well, another thing to think of it as like a starvation mentality too, right? When systems are breaking down, there's a lack of abundance, and there's a kind of fight for the resources that are left. And so this mother is trying to is fighting for resources in a crumbling system, in a broken system, right? And I think
the
that's
witch,
the mother, the devouring mother. Yeah.
Okay, just in general, you're not talking about the fairy tale with the witch.
Well, she being symbolic of that aspect of the devouring mother.
Right.
But so the system is sort of broken down and falling apart, and there's a kind of scramble for resources, and it's kind of like to try and stay alive, cannibalizing and kind of taking something away from something else in order to nourish yourself. It's almost like you're right. I mean, I don't know, why does she ally with the daughter in some way? I mean, maybe it's something as simple as because it's easier to other the male because she's female. There's some sense
I could be making something out of nothing, but I think it's interesting too that the boy Hansel sticks the chicken bone out so that she can test how fat he's getting, and she wants him fat before she'll eat him. So it's like that's his trick, is that she keeps thinking he's not getting fat enough, which is interesting along all the symbology we're talking about, that he has to be filled with vitality and to be overwhelmed with it, like bursting with it, before it's worth the trouble to devour him. And then she finally says, oh, what the hell, it's good enough, I'll eat him as he is. And then she turns to Gretel and says, I'm going to eat you too. Maybe I'll get something out of both of you. That's more. And so then she goes
traumatized psyche is desperate and irrational.
Yeah, right.
And I think it can sometimes be really hard to figure out logical, rational understandings of some of the ways in which a desperate psyche will try to regain wholeness. The wounding just sends you spiraling.
Right.
And these trauma defenses that we come up with are always so hastily conceived.
Right.
desperation. And then,
Right.
you look back and you'd think no one would consciously make the trade-off that you need to make when you conceive these defenses. But in the moment, you don't think about that. I need out of here right now, like my hair's on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Now the witch, I don't think, the symbol of the story is that she's an extreme. There's nothing else about her other than the symbol of what she is, because she obviously survives in this candy house, and she doesn't eat children every day and whatever. But so it's very symbolic in that sense, where the real mother has pieces of that, but not 100% that. She's not 100% a witch. She's not she's right. What you just described, somebody who's at the moment very desperate and, wants to survive and wants to feel good about who she is and what she is. So it's not often too far to the extreme. I mean, we have molesting and terrible humans, mothers, fathers as well, of course, out there, but we're more talking about the kind of the run-of-the-mill average kind of issue that's a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, wouldn't the fairy tale be describing what the medical model would call a personality disorder? It's taken over completely. There's nothing left.
Right.
Nothing really left of the woman in her wholeness, and that she's taken over completely by the complex, and she's driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no place in her life where it's not causing huge suffering. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to this? Or are you cool?
Feels complete to me.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, that's it for this one. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. And thanks for watching and listening. And remember, if anybody has any questions or want to check either one of us out for any more clarification of what we've talked about, let me throw it up here. My website is this. And I'll put Williams up when he was talking. And this is my email address. So if you want to write that down really quick, if you need to. And this is my email. So if you want to write to me about anything we've talked about, that would be great. And also, if you want to, for either one of us, you write to us if you're interested in having sessions or anything along those lines. Send me an email, send William an email. Also be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. And you can check out our Facebook page at ManTalk video podcast. And let me, okay, William, you want to say a couple of things? I'll put your email address up there.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been fun. You can see my email and my website down below. Reach out to me if you're interested in asking any questions or challenging me on something. The best part of this is that, I love the comment section down below. It's like, you guys don't see it. It's right in front of your eyes. Well, put it in the comment section below. I'm sure we'll get lots of people who are like, you see right into our blind spot.
That'll be great. Yeah. And we'll be back. We're going to try to do this as often as we can. So we'll be back soon. So keep an eye out for it. And we'll have another topic to talk about. If you guys have anything you'd want us to talk about in particular, just send us an email and let us know. Okay. So.
Thanks, Todd.